The desert night at Camp Valiant smelled like gunpowder and sweat, with sand whipping across the training grounds like ghost fingers. The proving field never rested, elite operators cycling in and out, their shadowy movements keeping the obstacle course in constant motion. Green tactical lights cast everything in an eerie glow, and the sound of distant firearms echoed through the valley like controlled thunder. Maya stepped off the transport truck, her tactical gear slung over one shoulder and a handwritten field notebook tucked into her cargo pocket. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She'd been filling those notebooks for 5 years now, mapping terrain features, ambush points, extraction protocols that weren't in any official manual. But nobody had ever asked to see them. The other candidates spent their downtime comparing weapon specs and swapping combat stories. Maya spent hers studying satellite imagery and memorizing topographical features that most commanders didn't even know existed. The assignment board glowed under harsh fluorescent lights, names printed on laminated strips and slotted into metal. Tracks, her name sat at the bottom in the smallest font. Maya observer only. No operational status, no team designation, no authority, just quiet permission to watch and stay silent. She didn't react. She'd learned not to. The prep tent buzzed with the usual pre-mission energy. Operators clustered around a tactical table, their conversation full of military shorthand and acronyms. Maya recognized every term. She'd been studying special operations longer than some of them had been in service. But when she approached the group, the talking stopped. "Who's the new observer?" Someone asked. "Maya something," another operator shrugged. "She's tagging along to observe. No field duties, just watch and stay out of the way." The words weren't cruel exactly, they were just policy. But they stung the same way they had for the past 20 months. Ever since she'd first requested Special Forces qualification training. Her application had been under review. For so long it had become a running joke among the administrative staff. Captain Mercer walked past without acknowledgement, his voice carrying from the next table. "She's not combat rated for anything. Keep her in the backup position and make sure she doesn't interfere with the operation." Maya adjusted her worn tactical gloves, the ones she'd bought herself, not the reinforced pairs issued to actual operators. They were creased and softened with use, ready for combat she wasn't permitted to join. As night deepened, the sandstorm thickened into a brown wall that swallowed the perimeter lights. Operators called out equipment checks and insertion delays. Their calsigns traded like markers in some exclusive game. Maya's name was never mentioned. She didn't mind. She was busy memorizing the terrain features that would matter when visibility dropped to 0. When her assigned team began gearing up for the final training exercise, she followed them without being asked. The team leader barely glanced at her as she took position at the rear of the formation, the same spot she'd occupied for dozens of operations, always watching, never participating. "Don't engage unless specifically ordered," the team leader reminded her, though he didn't need to. She'd never been given the chance. As the unit moved out into the black desert night, Maya pulled out her hand-drawn terrain map one more time. Every ridgeline, every blind spot, every potential ambush point was marked in red ink. She'd been preparing for this moment longer than anyone knew, studying not just the tactics, but the environment itself. The strike teams settled into their rhythm, a choreography that didn't include her. But Maya kept watching, kept learning, kept preparing, because somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew that someday, maybe soon, the mission would need her back. She just had to be ready when it did. By the second day, the heat had become just another piece of equipment, something you carried but stopped noticing. The pace had quickened, scenarios running faster, debriefs growing shorter, and the instructors' voices becoming sharper with each rotation. Maya had run 3 exercises by then, all in the same reserve position, all in complete silence. Her assigned spot never changed. Rear guard, 30 meters back, with no command authority, no tactical input, no access to mission updates. She moved with her weapon secured across her chest, her eyes constantly scanning, memorizing every procedure. The team had begun calling her the accessory when they thought she couldn't hear. Captain Mercer and his strike force, 2 assault specialists and a communications expert named Reyes, had settled into a rhythm that flowed around her like water around a stone. She was the extra body, the empty slot filled to satisfy some regulation nobody really understood. Why do we even need an observer? Reyes had asked during the morning briefing. Orders, Mercer had replied with a shrug. Someone upstairs wants eyes on the training. She's qualified to watch, not to operate. The briefings were held around a digital terrain table in the mobile command center, operators circling like predators around the glowing 3D map. Each operator got 5 minutes to adjust their approach vectors and ask questions. Maya got none. She sat on a metal bench at the edge of the tent, just outside the circle of authority, invisible to the tracking system that logged operator IDs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Once, she'd raised her hand quietly to make a suggestion about a blind spot near the eastern ravine. The junior controller with the tablet had waved her off without looking up. You're not combat rated for assault operations. Hold questions for post-mission. She'd lowered her hand and said nothing more. But later, when she checked the satellite feed on the monitoring station behind the equipment tent, her suspicions were confirmed. The enemy force was gathering exactly where she'd predicted, near Extraction Point Echo. The ridge created a natural funnel that would trap the assault team in a deadly crossfire. She pulled out her field notebook and drew the corrected approach path in red Inca, flanking maneuver instead of the planned frontal assault. If the sandstorm shifted as predicted, visibility would vanish just before the final approach. The standard insertion would become a death trap. Nobody had asked for her input, so she kept the information to herself. That night, she was reassigned to a different fire team for what they called a secondary observation slot. The new team leader looked her over once and pointed to the back of the formation. Rear position only. Don't engage unless it's a critical situation. She nodded and took her place in the designated position, her boots silent in the soft sand. The night operations began with their familiar rhythm, and she closed her eyes for just a moment to identify the subtle differences between the sound of friendly and hostile movement across loose terrain. Her weapon stayed secured across her chest. She didn't reach for her field notebook. It was already memorized. During the post-mission debrief, one operator made a casual comment while checking his equipment. "Makes me nervous when they're that quiet," he said. His friend replied without smiling. "Doesn't mean she knows what she's doing. Just means she's used to being ignored." Neither looked at her. They didn't need to. She'd become part of the background, like the hum of generators or the smell of gun oil. Just another piece of equipment that someone had decided was necessary, but not important. The debrief tent buzzed with talk about approach angles and how one team had nearly walked into an ambush on their final assault. The team leader who'd made the approach laughed it off. "Didn't feel that close to me." Maya didn't speak, but she'd seen the satellite feed. She'd watched the enemy movement patterns too, and she knew that team's chosen route would become impossible. After nightfall, her notes said so. Her carefully drawn map said so. Nobody asked. Standing outside the tent afterward, she watched sand move between the training grounds in low, drifting waves. The operator sat in shadow, rehydrating under the open sky. The final rotation was about to begin, the one that would test everyone's limits when visibility dropped to 0. She folded her updated field notebook and slipped it back into her cargo pocket. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow someone would need what she knew. But deep down, she was starting to wonder if tomorrow would ever come. The operations tent had grown quiet as the final training cycles wound down. Most teams were rolling through equipment checks, their voices low and tired. The mission board had been half erased, and someone had pulled back the canvas wall to let the night air clear out the accumulated haze of sweat and diesel. Maya sat in her usual spot at the edge of the tent, helmet beside her boot, her handwritten field notes tucked safely in her pocket. The exercise was nearly over. In a few hours, everyone would pack up and head back to their regular assignments, and she'd return to her desk job filing reports and updating training schedules. Then the radio crackled. Inject leave. Final extraction. Ravine Echo. LZ compromised. Hostiles have anti-aircraft capability. Extraction team requesting immediate ground evacuation. No GPS beacon. 15-minute window. The tent fell silent. One of the instructors looked up from his terminal, confusion creasing his face. That can't be real. No leave injects after 2,200 hours. But the controller's voice came through again, crisp and urgent. Inject. Confirmed. Final pickup. No automated navigation support. Grid reference only. The silence stretched. Half the team leaders muttered about equipment status. One navigator flipped through his tactical display, lips pressed tight. A veteran operator started to volunteer, then hesitated. My team split. 2 casualties in the last simulation. Captain Mercer looked over his shoulder, scanning the room. That's the worst possible extraction zone to run blind. The ravine crossfire alone. He pulled off his comms headset. Who's up? No one answered. The silence thickened, broken. Only by the creak of tactical gear and the distant hum of generators. Maya felt her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew that extraction zone. She'd studied it, mapped it, run it in her mind 100 times. The eastern ravine was a nightmare in good weather. In a sandstorm with no navigation support, it was nearly impossible. Nearly. The shuffle of boots was almost imperceptible as she rose from her bench. Her voice cut across the tent like a blade. I can take it. Every head turned. Some blinked, unsure who had spoken. Others narrowed their eyes in recognition of the quiet observer who'd been haunting their operations for months. Maya stood, calm, one hand briefly touching the pocket where her field notebook rested. I've reviewed the eastern ravine twice. I've logged the ambush patterns and the access route forming through the north saddle. I know the approach. Reyes, the communications specialist, scoffed. You've never even run a full operation. Correct, Maya nodded. But I've studied this specific extraction in blackout conditions. I have the sequence memorized. I can bring the team in low through the wash. The north saddle's still clear. It will close in 12 minutes. Someone near the map table muttered, she's guessing. No, Maya said quietly. I've already seen it. The tent held its breath. Captain Mercer studied her face, his expression unreadable. You think you can run this blind? No beacon, partial intel, compromised extraction zone? Yes, and if I'm wrong, then you take command. But I won't be wrong. The controller's voice cut through the tension. LZ is live. Clock is ticking. Mercer held her gaze for another long moment, then reached for his tactical vest, his grip. Steady but his eyes intense. One shot at the insertion. You missed that approach. I take control. Maya took the offered team designation patch, her fingers wrapping around it like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. I won't miss it. As the strike team broke into motion, voices rising, equipment clattering, boots pounding. Toward the transport vehicles, Maya moved through the chaos with supernatural calm. She ducked under the tent flap, walked through the sand blowing across the staging area, and stepped onto the tactical transport's loading ramp as it lowered. Her boots hit the steel deck like she'd always belonged there. In the vehicle bay, the team was already prepping. Mercer was securing his gear, his expression tense but no longer doubtful. Maya settled into the lead position and checked her weapon with precise, practiced movements. The transport began to rumble beneath her hands. Outside, someone called for final clearance. The engine shifted with a growl, then smoothed into its familiar rhythm. Inside the tactical vehicle, the lights dimmed and navigation displays glowed softly. Some readouts blinked warnings, standard for the simulation's jamming protocol. The sandstorm outside grew thicker, and she knew they had maybe 10 minutes before the extraction window closed completely. She slipped her field notebook into her side pocket, though she wouldn't need it again. Every line was burned into her memory. The mission wouldn't be long. Just one approach, one extraction. One chance to prove that all those months of watching and waiting had been building to this moment. Everything was about to change. The transport rumbled beneath Maya as the engine roared to full power. The tactical display cast a soft blue glow across the equipment racks, and outside, sand glimmered orange under the base's warning lights. She sat perfectly still in the commander's position, harness locked, fingers resting on her weapon. Behind her, voices carried from the vehicle bay, nervous whispers from team members who'd never seen her do more than sit quietly in the observer's position. "She's just backup, right?" someone asked. "No," came the reply. "She's leading it." "But she's not combat certified." "She is now." The vehicle bay fell silent. In the secondary position, Captain Mercer made final adjustments to his tactical display, his movements quick and precise. His eyes never fully left her, but she could feel his attention shifting from doubt to careful observation. He was ready to take control if she faltered, but something in his posture suggested he no longer expected her to fail. Maya reached for the communication system and activated it with a practiced motion. No delay, the signal was clear and strong. One warning. Indicator blinked amber normal for a rapid deployment sequence. She acknowledged it, cleared it, and moved on. The navigation screen beside her flickered twice and went dark. No map overlay. No digital terrain display. The simulation's jamming protocol had activated, cutting them off from automated guidance systems. She'd expected this. In fact, she'd been preparing for it. "You sure about the insertion point?" Mercer asked quietly. "Yes." He nodded once and looked forward. "Control, this is Echo Actual, spinning up and requesting clearance for final inject." "East Ravine." The reply was immediate. "Clearance confirmed." "Launch authorized. No navigation assistance available." Maya's voice was steady. "Copy. Moving now." She accelerated the transport forward, guiding it with subtle precision. The vehicle powered across the base perimeter, its massive frame fighting the crosswind that always plagued the desert outpost. The wheels broke free of the concrete pad, and suddenly they were in open terrain, racing across the darkness. Wind struck from the left, sudden, vicious, and strong enough to slam the entire vehicle sideways. For a moment, the transport drifted dangerously close to a rocky outcropping. In the vehicle bay, someone grabbed an overhead strap, eyes wide. But Maya didn't panic. She didn't overcorrect. She simply adjusted the steering with minute precision, shifted gears with practiced ease, and held the vehicle steady with experienced hands. The wind caught the edge of the transport, slid across the armored skin, and moved on. The vehicle stabilized, balanced, and controlled. "Drift corrected," she said into her headset. "Bearing east-northeast, holding ravine approach. ETA to extraction. Point, 8 minutes." From the secondary position, Mercer reached toward the emergency controls, then stopped. He watched her hands on the controls steady, unmoving, completely confident. He let his hand fall away. The route ahead was a wall of swirling sand, the kind of blinding storm that swallowed light and hope in equal measure. The only visible reference points were the faint glow of the vehicle's instrumentation and the occasional flash of lightning in the distance. But Maya didn't need to see the terrain. She'd memorized every contour, every dune pattern, every blind spot that flowed through the desert's natural channels. She drove by instinct and preparation, her mind filled with the hand-drawn maps she'd created during those long, lonely months of being ignored. The transport banked left in a controlled turn. "Terrain feature in 5 seconds, she announced calmly. "Reducing speed 20%, holding approach angle." Mercer exhaled softly. The voices in the vehicle bay had gone completely silent. Ahead, through a brief gap in the sandstorm, came the flicker of emergency signals. The extraction team was down there somewhere, waiting in the dark on a narrow plateau that most operators would never attempt to reach in perfect conditions, much less in the middle of a blinding sandstorm. Maya brought the vehicle lower, her corrections smooth and precise. She was following the ravine line completely blind, and every adjustment was perfect. From behind, Reyes leaned forward in his harness, squinting through the windscreen. "She's locked on," he said, his voice filled with something between amazement and relief. "She's really locked on." The extraction point appeared below them. Like a miracle, a small clearing illuminated by emergency beacons, with a group of figures taking cover behind rocky outcroppings. Maya positioned the transport expertly and brought it to a stop with surgical precision, the wheels touching ground. Without even a jolt. "Rear ramp down," she called, loading in 30 seconds. The extraction team sprinted toward them, heads low against the blowing sand. Within moments, they were aboard, the ramp was sealed, and Maya was powering them back into the darkness. Captain Mercer looked at her with something that might have been awe. "You've got it," he said simply. She nodded once, her attention already focused on the return journey. The hardest part was yet to come, navigating back through the deteriorating conditions with a full load and limited fuel. But for the first time in months, Maya wasn't the observer anymore. She was exactly where she belonged, in control, in command, and finally given the chance to show what she could do. The mission had needed her after all. The return journey was where everything could go wrong. The sandstorm had thickened into an almost solid wall, and the wind had shifted to a more aggressive pattern. They threw the heavy transport around like a toy. Maya kept one hand on the steering controls, the other ready near the communication system, but she never wavered. Behind her, the extracted team sat in stunned silence. Most had never seen an operation from this angle, never watched an operator navigate purely by instinct through conditions that would ground most vehicles. They couldn't look away. "Terrain rising," Maya announced calmly, adjusting their course, compensating for wind shift. The navigation systems were still dark, their screens showing nothing but static. Every course correction came from her memory of the hand-drawn maps. Every route change based on the subtle shifts in terrain feedback that told her when they were approaching dangerous ground. A massive gust slammed into the right side of the transport, tilting the entire frame at a dangerous angle. One of the extraction team members grabbed his seat rail, eyes wide with terror. Captain Mercer reached instinctively for the emergency controls, but stopped when he saw Maya's response. Her hand was already moving, making minute adjustments to counter the wind before the vehicle could destabilize. "Counterdrift aligned," she said simply, "stabilizing." The shuddering stopped. The transport drove on, steady as a heartbeat. In the vehicle bay, Reyes finally exhaled the breath he'd been holding. "She's not just driving it," he whispered to no one in particular. "She's reading the terrain." The sandstorm began to show. Hints of artificial light ahead, the base perimeter beacons penetrating the haze. They were almost home, but this was the most dangerous part of any operation. The approach required threading between security checkpoints and defensive barriers, all invisible in the thick storm. "Landing pattern in sight," Maya reported, beginning final approach sequence. She brought them in wide, circling once to align. with the wind pattern she'd memorized, then dropped low for the final approach. The maneuver was textbook perfect, smooth, controlled, and exactly where it needed to be. "Base perimeter in 10 seconds, she announced. The transport crossed the concrete barrier with barely a bump. The engine wound down, the systems began their shutdown sequence, and the mission was complete. In the sudden quiet, the extraction team filed out without speaking. One of them paused at the bottom of the ramp, looked back at Maya through the open cargo bay, and mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." She nodded once in acknowledgement. As Maya powered down the systems one by one, Captain Mercer sat motionless, in the secondary position, looking like a man waking from a profound dream. "That was," he started, then stopped. "In 12 years of operations, I've never seen anything like that." Outside, ground crews had gathered more people than usual, drawn by word that something extraordinary had just happened. They watched as Maya stepped out of the transport, helmet under her arm, face streaked with sweat from the intense concentration. She walked calmly across the staging area, her boots echoing on the concrete. The transport sat silent now, cooling down from the operation. People were pointing, whispering, trying to process what they'd witnessed. Inside the operations tent, the buzz of voices stopped dead when someone shouted, "They made it back." Screens lit up with telemetry data from the mission-perfect approach angles, clean extraction profiles, evasive maneuvers that looked like they'd been calculated by computer, but had actually come from pure instinct. "Who was the team leader?" someone asked, looking at the assignment board where Maya's name still appeared only as observer. Captain Mercer followed her into the tent, his helmet still in his hands, his expression unreadable. "She ran it," he announced to the room. "Every decision, every approach, every extraction. That was all her." The room fell silent again. The mission controller at the console pulled up the operation telemetry on his screen. The data didn't lie: perfect performance from departure to return. 3 minutes ahead of the mission window. Not a single system pushed beyond normal parameters. "Call sign?" someone asked, looking at the blank space on the mission board. No one answered immediately. The board stayed empty. But the screen told the whole story. She had done what no one else had even volunteered to attempt, and she'd done it flawlessly. For the first time in her military career, Maya wasn't just the observer. She was the operator everyone would be talking about for years to come. But more importantly, she was finally exactly where she belonged. The debrief room was packed wall to wall the next morning. Folding chairs scraped against concrete. Thermal coffee mugs steamed in the cold air, and the hum of projectors filled the spaces between conversations. Most of the operators had stripped down to base layers, their boots still dusted with sand from the night's operations. Major Adams stood at the front of the room, arms crossed, mission notes tucked under one arm. He didn't look at Maya, who sat quietly on a low bench along the far edge of the tent, half in shadow. Her helmet rested beside her, visor down, untouched. "Last rotation," the controller announced, pulling up the mission data on the main screen. "Inject, extract, East Ravine." The room buzzed with casual conversation, most assuming it would be another routine training review. Adams stepped forward, his expression more serious than usual. "This one's different," he said. "No pre-brief, no GP speaking. Partial communications. Blackout. We had one shot to reach the extraction team." Someone in the front row leaned forward. "Who ran it?" Adams didn't answer immediately. Instead, he nodded to the operator beside the console. The main screen cut to black, then lit up with helmet camera footage. No dramatic music, no introduction, just the silent roll of motion. The footage opened with low-light navigation, the transport slipping beneath the swirling sand like a ghost. The storm glowed in sharp orange pulses as the vehicle's exterior lights cycled. The only sound was the steady rhythm of controlled breathing. In the operator's headset, In the corner of the screen, mission telemetry ran in real-time course adjustments in perfect increments. Wind speeds matched with precise steering corrections. Terrain mapping logged within acceptable margins. Every timestamp ticked cleanly. Forward. From the back of the room, someone exhaled sharply. That's not simulated navigation. She's driving it completely by instinct. A few heads turned, but no one looked directly at Maya. On the screen, the footage followed the final approach toward the ravine line. Emergency signals burst into view, and the operator's visor reflected the light briefly as the transport descended for extraction. The timing was exact. The positioning was perfect, no hesitation, no error. In a second window, the landing zone overlay drew itself in real time, showing the computer's analysis of the approach path. The route Maya had taken was the only one, clear of enemy fire and terrain hazards. The simulation's tactical modeling, running post-mission analysis, confirmed that she had somehow predicted enemy movements that the instruments couldn't detect. She anticipated the hostiles' positions before our systems could model them, someone whispered from the front row. On the video, the extraction team loaded quickly and efficiently. The ramp sealed. The transport powered away, and then came the return journey, the truly dangerous part. Another crosswind slammed into the vehicle, threatening to throw it into a rocky outcropping, but Maya's voice cut through the headset feed, calm and certain. Counterdrift aligned, stabilizing. The transport steadied instantly, as if the wind had simply decided to obey. The footage ended with the final approach to base, another textbook maneuver executed in near-zero visibility. The timestamp showed 22:43:17 minutes inside the mission window, with fuel to spare. Complete silence filled the debrief room. Captain Mercer stepped forward from his position along the side wall. His tactical vest was still fitted, his helmet strap tucked neatly into his collar. He looked at the instructors, then at the mission board, where the team leader column still showed blank. "Team leader," he said clearly. "Maya, score 100%. A murmur broke through the room, but no one laughed. No one challenged it. The telemetry data was undeniable. Major Adams dropped his mission notes. They hit the floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the silence. The operator at the console looked at the mission board, picked up a dry erase marker, and wrote her name in the team leader column. Just Maya. No rank, no call sign. She didn't need them anymore. The extraction team, still in their field. Gear from the night before had filed in during the video. One of them pointed at the screen, then at her. He said something under his breath to his teammates, and they all nodded. They didn't applaud or cheer. They just stood there, looking at her with the kind of respect reserved for people who do impossible things and make them look routine. The instructors gathered near the console, whispering among themselves. One looked at the telemetry readings, then back at the replay footage. "She ran that entire operation from visual memory," he said quietly. "No navigation aids. No command guidance. That infiltration pattern wasn't even in our database." Adams finally turned toward Maya, his expression neither harsh nor gentle, just the look of someone seeing a mystery they couldn't solve. "She wasn't cleared for team leader status," he said flatly. Captain Mercer didn't flinch. "She is now." The score remained on the screen, 100%. The telemetry ran again in the corner, looped automatically by the system. Perfect performance, beginning to end. Reyes stepped into the tent last, ducking under the flap and pausing near the coffee. "Station." He looked at the board, then at Maya, and gave a slight nod, not mocking this time, just quiet acknowledgement. Maya stood slowly, picked up her helmet, and walked past the assembled crowd without looking for permission. Nobody stopped her. Nobody questioned her right to leave. Outside, the sandstorm was lifting, and the sky was beginning to show hints of blue. For the first time in her military career, Maya's name was on the board, not as an observer, but as a team leader. And everyone in that room knew they had witnessed something they would never forget. Word traveled fast through the base. By afternoon, Maya's operation had become the subject of quiet conversations in every barracks, mess hall, and training facility. The video footage was making its way through official channels, marked for command review and advanced training. She wasn't famous. Military culture doesn't work that way, but she was known. The change was subtle but immediate. When she walked into the ready tent that evening, the conversation didn't stop, but it shifted. Operators made room at the briefing table without being asked. The equipment sergeant handed her a new tactical vest with her name embroidered on the chest and underneath it in smaller letters, Team Leader. Captain Mercer found her checking satellite imagery near the communications station. "We've got a new assignment," he said, holding a folder marked with the red stripe of urgent priority. "Special Forces qualification flights. They want you to lead the instruction sequence." Maya looked up from the geographical data she'd been studying. "Lead instructor?" "Lead operator," he corrected. "They want other candidates to learn how to operate the way you do, especially in degraded conditions." She took the folder and opened it. Inside were the profiles of 8 experienced operators, all requesting advanced training in navigation-free insertion tactics. At the bottom of the first page, a handwritten note from the base commander. "Establish new protocols based on yesterday's performance. Priority Alpha." "They want me to teach what I did last night?" Mercer smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in months. "They want you to teach operators how to think like you, how to see patterns that don't show up on instruments, how to navigate with their instincts instead of just their training." Over the following weeks, Maya found herself in a position she'd never imagined: authority. Her tactical techniques were being studied, documented, and incorporated into the base's training curriculum. Junior operators sought her out for advice on reading terrain patterns. Senior officers consulted her on planning for difficult insertions. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. She still drew her field maps by hand, but now other operators asked to see them. She still preferred to work alone, but now she had a team of instructors eager to learn her methods. Most importantly, she was no longer invisible. Her voice carried weight in briefings. Her suggestions were implemented, not dismissed. When she recommended changes to standard approach procedures, the operations manual was updated accordingly. Major Adams, who had initially questioned her credentials, became one of her strongest supporters. "What she did that night," he told the base commander, "that wasn't luck or instinct. That was a different level of preparation. She'd been ready for that moment for years." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The observer who had been overlooked for so long was now setting the standard for everyone else to follow. But Maya handled the recognition the same way she'd handled the isolation, with quiet professionalism and unwavering focus on the work itself. She didn't need validation from others anymore. She'd found something more valuable: the knowledge that when the moment came, she'd been ready. And now she was helping others find that same readiness in themselves. The desert air still smelled like gunpowder and sand. The operators still cycled through their rotations, and the training ground still hummed with constant activity. But something fundamental had changed at Camp Valiant. The observer had become the observed. The student had become the teacher. And the operator who had once been denied Special Forces status was now writing the book on what it meant to truly operate. 6 months later, Maya stood at the same assignment board where her name had once appeared in the smallest font as observer. Only, now it was printed in bold letters at the top: Chief Instructor, Advanced Navigation. Below it, a list of operators scheduled for her specialized training program. The desert base had become a different place. The techniques she had developed, reading terrain patterns by subtle changes in sound, navigating by memorized features rather than instruments, Approaching hostiles through instinct and preparation rather than technology had become standard. Curriculum. Operators from other bases came to Camp Valiant specifically to train under her program. But the real change was in the culture itself. The ready tent that had once buzzed with exclusion and casual dismissal now operated with a different energy. Young candidates who showed unconventional thinking were encouraged rather than sidelined. Observers were given chances to prove themselves. The phrase "just watch and stay out of the way" had disappeared from the vocabulary entirely. Maya still arrived early and stayed late, still hand-drew her field diagrams, still preferred to work through problems alone before sharing solutions with others. But now these habits were seen as dedication rather than stubbornness, expertise rather than overreach. Captain Mercer, now her deputy instructor, found her one evening at the satellite station, updating her maps with the latest intelligence. "Data. The new class starts tomorrow," he said. 16 operators, including 3 from Overseas Special Forces. "They're all here because they heard about what you did that night." She looked up from her work. "They're here to learn advanced navigation techniques. What happened that night was just the application of preparation." "Maybe," he said with a slight smile. "But they're also here because word got out that there's a place where being different isn't a liability, where thinking outside standard procedures is actually valued." The next morning, Maya walked into the briefing room to find 16 operators seated around the table. Some young, some experienced, all eager to learn. She recognized the look in their eyes, the same hunger for knowledge, the same determination to excel that she'd carried during her own months of observation. "Good morning," she said simply. "I'm Maya. Before we talk about tactical operations, I want you to understand something. Everything you think you know about impossible missions is about to change." She moved to the digital board and drew a simple ravine map with quick, confident strokes. 6 months ago, I sat where you're sitting now. I was told I wasn't qualified, wasn't ready, wasn't good enough. I spent 20 months watching others operate while I was relegated to observer status. She turned back to face the group. "But I never stopped preparing. I never stopped learning. And when the moment came when everyone else said it couldn't be done, I was ready." One of the younger operators raised his hand. "Ma'am, how do you prepare for something you've never been allowed to do?" Maya smiled, recognizing something of her former self in the question. "You prepare by understanding that permission and preparation are 2 different things. You can't control when you'll get your chance, but you can control. You prepare by understanding that permission and preparation are 2 different things. You can't control when you'll get your chance, but you can control whether you'll be ready when it comes." She spent the next hour walking them through the fundamentals of intuitive navigation, how to read terrain patterns by the way sand settles against rock formations, how to predict enemy movements by observing subtle environmental changes, how to navigate in zero visibility by feeling vibrations through the vehicle's frame. "The technology will fail you," she told them. "The conditions will surprise you. The mission parameters will change without warning. But if you've done the work, if you've truly prepared, you'll have something no computer can give you: understanding." During the afternoon field exercise, she watched from the command post as her students attempted their first instrument-free insertions. Some struggled, fighting against years of training that had taught them to trust technology over instinct. Others began to find their rhythm, discovering capabilities they didn't know they possessed. Later, as the sun set behind the desert mountains and the training grounds glowed with their familiar tactical lights, Maya found herself back at the satellite station. It had become her thinking place, the spot where she processed the day's lessons and planned for tomorrow's challenges. A young operator named Torres approached hesitantly. He'd been one of the strugglers during the afternoon exercise, his approach wavering and uncertain. "Ma'am, I wanted to ask, when you made that run 6 months ago, weren't you scared?" Maya considered the question carefully. "Terrified," she said finally. "But fear and readiness aren't opposites. I was scared because I understood exactly how difficult it was going to be. But I was also ready because I'd been preparing for that exact scenario for years." "How did you know it would happen?" "I didn't know when, but I knew it would happen eventually, some impossible mission that everyone else would say couldn't be done. And I decided that when it did, I wanted to be the person who could do it." Torres nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. So the real training wasn't learning to operate. It was learning to be ready, Maya finished. "Exactly." As Torres walked away, Maya reflected on how much had changed since that sandstorm night when she'd stepped forward and said, "I can take it." The observer who had been overlooked and dismissed was now shaping the next generation of operators. The quiet preparation that had once seemed like futile effort was now recognized as the foundation of excellence. Her name was permanently etched on the mission board, now no longer as an observer, but as the standard by which others measured themselves. The techniques she'd developed were being taught at special operations schools across the country. The culture of exclusion that had kept her sidelined was being replaced by one that valued preparation over politics, competence over credentials. But perhaps the most important change was the simplest one. When young candidates with unconventional ideas or unproven backgrounds walked into the ready tent now, they weren't told to sit quietly in the corner. They were given tactical maps to study, techniques to master, and the chance to prove what they could do when the moment finally came. The sandstorm rolled in that evening just as it had 6 months before. The vehicles sat silent on their staging. Areas waiting for tomorrow's missions, and somewhere in the ready tent, a new group of operators studied hand-drawn field maps and tactical patterns, preparing for challenges they couldn't yet imagine. Maya smiled as she folded her latest charts and headed back to quarters. The cycle was beginning again: observation, preparation, opportunity, and transformation. But now it was happening to others, guided by the knowledge that no mission is too impossible if you're willing to do the work when no one is watching. The desert would always need people who were ready, and thanks to what had started that night in the storm, there would always be operators prepared to answer the call. In a world where recognition often comes to those who demand it loudest, Maya's story remained a quiet reminder that the most powerful victories are won not with noise and bluster, but with patient preparation and the unshakable conviction that your moment will come. When it does, the only question that matters is whether you'll be ready. For Maya, the answer had always been yes. The observer became the instructor. The overlooked became the indispensable. And the operator who was once denied Special Forces status became the one who rewrote the rules for everyone who came after. If you've ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or told you weren't ready, remember Maya's story. Your preparation isn't wasted. Your patience isn't weakness. And when your moment comes, let your work speak louder than any words ever could. Sometimes the quiet ones are the ones who've been getting ready all along. 3 weeks into her new role as chief instructor, Maya received orders that would test everything she'd built. Not just her tactical skills, but the very training methodology she'd developed. "Command wants proof of concept," Major Adams explained, sliding a classified folder across the briefing table. "They're impressed by the training data, but they want a field demonstration." Maya opened the folder. Inside lay mission parameters for an operation code named Phantom Echo. The objective was straightforward but daunting: a hostage extraction from a heavily fortified compound in mountainous terrain. The complication: complete communications blackout, no aerial support, and a 36-hour window before the hostages would be moved. "They're sending 4 teams, Adams continued, each with different operational backgrounds. Delta, Rangers, Marine Recon, and," he paused, meeting her eyes, "your graduates." Maya scanned the roster. All 8 of her first training class were listed, led by Torres, the once hesitant operator who had come the furthest under her guidance. "What's the catch?" she asked, sensing there was more. Adam's expression tightened. "It's a competition. 4 teams, same objective, different insertion points. Command wants to see if your methods hold up against traditional tactics." Maya understood immediately. This wasn't just a field test, it was a referendum on everything she'd built. If her team failed, her entire program could be dismantled. When do they deploy? 48 hours. You're authorized to brief your team, but you can't accompany them. This is where we find out if what you've taught them sticks. As Adams left, Maya studied the terrain maps included in the briefing package. The operation zone was a nightmare, a maze of narrow valleys, blind corners, and natural choke points. Traditional tactics would send teams straight into multiple ambush scenarios. She reached for her field notebook and began drawing. That evening, she gathered her team in the secure briefing room. Torres entered last, his usual confidence tempered by the weight of what they were about to face. "By now you've all received your mission parameters," Maya began, skipping formalities. "What you haven't been told is that 3 other elite teams will be attempting the same extraction. Command is treating this as a competition." Murmurs rippled through the group. Reyes, who had once mocked her, now leaned forward intently. "The other teams will be using conventional tactics," she continued. "They'll rely on technology until it fails them, then fall back on standard operating procedures. That's exactly why they'll struggle." She unfolded her hand-drawn map on the table. It showed the target compound, but with approach routes that followed no logical pattern, zigzagging through terrain features that conventional wisdom would avoid. "The conventional approach would be through these 3 valleys," she said, pointing to obvious routes. "They offer concealment and direct access. They're also perfect ambush points. Our approach will be here." Her finger traced a seemingly impossible route across exposed ridgelines and steep descents. "This makes no sense," one operator objected. "We'd be completely exposed," Maya nodded. "To aerial surveillance, yes. But there's no aerial presence in this region. What matters is ground-level visibility. These ridgelines offer 3 critical advantages. First, no conventional force would expect an approach from these angles. Second, the terrain itself will mask your movement if you follow the exact pathways I've marked. Third, and most importantly, you'll be able to observe the other team's movements without exposing yourselves." She turned to Torres. "You'll command. Reyes will handle tactical communications. The rest of you will operate in 2-person cells, exactly as we've trained. Remember, when the technology fails, and it will, trust what you've learned about reading the environment." Torres studied the map, his expression transitioning from doubt to understanding. "This route brings us within 50 meters of the rear compound wall, completely blind to their security positions. Except you won't be blind," Maya corrected, pulling out satellite imagery of the compound taken at different times of day. "Look at the shadow patterns. The guards rotate positions every 2 hours, but they follow predictable paths. More importantly, look at the ground." The team leaned closer. "The soil composition changes 3 meters from the wall. Different density, different sound profile when walked on. If you time your approach with their patrol pattern, you can use their own movement to mask yours." One by one, the operators' expressions changed as they grasped the subtle genius of her approach. They wouldn't be fighting against the environment. They'd be using it as both weapon and shield. "The other teams have more experience," Torres sighed quietly. "But they don't have what matters most," Maya replied. "They haven't learned to see what's really there, only what they expect to be there. That's the difference between training and preparation." For the next 6 hours, they dissected every aspect of the operation. No detail was too small. The angle of moonlight at the projected extraction time, the sound profile of different footwear on varied terrain, the thermal signatures of bodies against rock and sand. When they finally dispersed to prepare their equipment, Torres remained behind. "What if we fail?" he asked simply. Maya met his gaze. "Then you'll have failed. While trying something extraordinary, instead of succeeding at something ordinary." "But you won't fail. How can you be so sure?" "Because I chose each of you for the same reason. You all showed the capacity to see beyond your training. To question, to adapt, to prepare for scenarios no one told you were coming." She placed her hand on the map. "This isn't just a mission. It's the culmination of everything you've learned about being ready for the unexpected." As Torres left to join his team, Maya remained in the briefing room, staring at the map she'd created. She'd done all she could. Now it was up to them to prove that her methods weren't just theoretical. They were the future of special operations. 36 hours later, Maya sat alone in the communication center, watching as the operation unfolded through fragmented intelligence reports. As predicted, all conventional communications were being jammed. The only updates came through pre-arranged signal bursts at designated intervals, simple-coded messages transmitted in microsecond bursts that were difficult to intercept or jam. The first update arrived from the Delta team. "Insertion complete. Moving to Phase 1. 20 minutes later, the Rangers. "Insertion complete. Contact at Checkpoint Alpha. 2 casualties. Proceeding. Marine Recon. Insertion delayed. Encountering resistance at entry point." Then, silence from all teams for nearly an hour. Major Adams entered the communication center, his face tense. "Anything from your team?" Maya shook her head. According to the operation timeline, her team should have signaled 10 minutes ago. The absence of communication could mean anything from equipment failure to catastrophic compromise. "They'll adapt," she said with more confidence than she felt. "It's what they've been trained to do." Another 30 minutes passed. The Rangers reported heavy resistance. Delta was pinned down near their secondary checkpoint. Marine Recon had gone completely dark. Adams was about to speak when a signal burst registered, not from any of them. Predetermined transmission points, but from an unexpected location nearly 2 kilometers from where Maya's team should have been. The decoded message was simple. "Phantom Echo complete. Package secured. Extracting via route serpentine." Adams stared at the screen in disbelief. "That's impossible. They can't have reached the objective already. And what the hell is route serpentine?" "It's not in the mission parameters." Maya couldn't help the small smile that formed. "It's what they named the route I designed. It wasn't in the official parameters because it doesn't exist in conventional tactical doctrine." "Are you saying they've already completed the extraction while the other teams haven't even reached the compound?" "I'm saying they saw what was really there, not what they expected to see," Maya replied. "The other teams are fighting through prepared defenses because they're following predictable approaches. My team went where no one expected them, using the terrain itself as their primary tool." 4 hours later, as dawn broke over the desert base, a single transport rolled through the gates. It carried Torres and his team, exhausted but uninjured, and 4 rescued hostages. Of the other teams, Delta and the Rangers were still engaged in extraction operations. Marine Recon had been forced to abort their mission after sustaining multiple casualties. In the debriefing that followed, Torres explained how they'd abandoned the planned extraction route when they observed unusual thermal patterns, suggesting a hidden enemy position. "We didn't have time to report the change," he explained to the assembled command staff. "The communications window was closed, and we had to make a decision. So we applied the fundamental principle Maya taught us: when the expected becomes impossible, find the unexpected path that becomes possible." They had navigated a treacherous mountain descent in near total darkness, using techniques Maya had taught them for reading terrain by touch and sound rather than sight. They'd approached the compound from precisely the angle she'd identified. using the guards' own patrol patterns as cover for their insertion. The entire operation had taken less than 2 hours from insertion to extraction. As the briefing concluded, General Harris, who had flown in specifically to observe the outcome, addressed the room. "I've seen a lot of tactical innovations in 30 years of special operations," he said slowly. "But what happened here isn't just an improvement on existing methods. It's a fundamental reevaluation of how we approach high-risk extractions." He turned to Maya, who had remained quietly in the back of the room. "Your training program is no longer experimental, Chief Instructor. As of today, it's being established as a permanent advanced qualification course. I want instructors trained in your methodology at every special operations school in the country." As the room emptied, Major Adams approached her with an expression caught between amazement and respect. "When you first stood up in that tent 6 months ago, I thought we were desperate to even consider sending you out," he admitted. "Now I realize we were desperate not to have sent you sooner." Maya nodded her acknowledgement, but her attention was already on Torres and his team. They sat together at the far end of the briefing room, quietly celebrating in the way that only those who have faced death together can understand. They weren't loud or boastful. They simply carried themselves with the quiet confidence of people who had discovered their true capabilities. In that moment, Maya realized she had created something more valuable than just a new tactical doctrine. She had fostered a mindset, a way of seeing the world that transcended conventional limitations. As she watched them, Torres caught her eye and nodded once, a simple gesture that conveyed everything that needed to be said. Teacher and student, mentor and protege, both understanding that true excellence isn't about being the best among your peers. It's about redefining what's possible for everyone who follows. 3 days later, Maya stood at the edge of the training grounds, watching as a new group of candidates arrived twice the size of her previous class. Word had spread quickly after the success of Phantom Echo. Now, special operators from across the military were requesting transfer to her program. Captain Mercer joined her, clipboard in hand. First impressions? Maya studied the new arrivals. Unlike her previous students, these operators carried themselves with a different energy, not the usual confident swagger of elite soldiers, but the focused intention of people who had come to learn something specific. "They're ready to be challenged," she observed. "That's a good start." "They're here because of what Torres' team accomplished," Mercer said. Operation Phantom Echo is already being used as a case study at the War College. Maya nodded, but her attention was drawn to a figure at the back of the new group, a woman, slightly built, hanging back from the others with the unmistakable body language of someone who felt out of place, but was determined not to show it. "Who's that?" she asked, nodding toward the female operator. Mercer checked his roster. Jensen, Marina Jensen. Army Intelligence. She specifically requested your program after hearing about your methods. Her file says she's been denied special operations qualification 3 times despite scoring in the top percentile on all technical assessments. "Sounds familiar," Maya said quietly. As the new candidates were led toward the processing center, Maya made her way across the training ground, intercepting Jensen before she entered the building. "Specialist Jensen," she called. The woman turned, surprise registering briefly before her expression returned to careful neutrality. "Chief Instructor." "Walk with me," Maya said, gesturing away from the group. They moved in silence along the perimeter fence, the desert stretching endlessly beyond. Maya could feel Jensen's tension, the hyper-awareness of someone who had spent their career being evaluated and found wanting, not because of their abilities, but because of who they were. "Your file says you've been denied qualification 3 times, Maya said finally. Jensen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, ma'am. And yet you've continued to apply." "Yes, ma'am. Why?" Jensen hesitated, clearly weighing whether this was another test. Finally, she answered with quiet intensity. Because I know I can do the job. Because I've spent 4 years studying operations that went wrong, identifying the moments where different decision-making could have changed the outcome. Because I see patterns that others miss. She paused. And because every time they deny me, it just gives me more time to prepare for when they can't deny me anymore. Maya stopped walking and turned to face her directly. Do you know why I chose this life, Yenzin? Not just special operations, but this specific path? No, ma'am. Because the hardest missions, the ones where lives hang in the balance, don't care about your gender, your background, or how many times someone told you that you don't belong. They only care about one thing, whether you're ready. She pointed back toward the training grounds, where Torres was now leading his team through a demonstration for the new arrivals. 6 months ago, I was where you are now. The observer no one wanted, the voice no one listened to. But I had spent years preparing for a moment I wasn't even sure would come. And when it did, when everyone else hesitated, I was ready. Maya looked directly into Yenzin's eyes. The question isn't whether they'll give you a chance. The question is whether you'll be ready when circumstances demand that they have no choice. For the first time, Yenzin's carefully maintained expression gave way to something more genuine, a flash of recognition, of finding unexpected understanding. That's why I'm here, she said simply. To be ready. Maya nodded once. Then let's get to work. As they walked back toward the training grounds, Maya felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun with her own struggle was continuing through others who would face the same barriers, the same dismissals, the same opportunities. To prove that readiness transcends all limitations. The desert wind picked up, sending sand swirling across the training course. New operators were already beginning their first assessments, facing challenges designed to strip away their dependence on technology and force them to develop deeper awareness. Some would fail, some would excel. All would be transformed. Maya watched as Yenzin joined the group, standing slightly apart, but utterly focused on the instruction being given. She recognized that focus, the intensity of someone cataloging every detail, preparing not just for the obvious challenges, but for the unexpected moments when everything would depend on seeing what others missed. The observer, the prepared, the ready. The cycle continued, and with it, the quiet revolution that had begun the night Maya had stepped forward and said 3 simple words that changed everything. I can take it. 1 year after Operation Absolute Deniability, Maya's intuitive operations program had evolved from revolutionary to essential. Special operations teams across 5 allied nations now incorporated her methodologies, creating a global network of operators trained to see beyond conventional limitations. What had begun as the desperate gamble of an overlooked observer had transformed military doctrine at the highest levels. But success brought new challenges. As Maya sat in her expanded office at the now renamed Intuitive Operations Center, she reviewed the latest mission reports with growing concern. Implementation was inconsistent across different units. Some commanders embraced the core principles wholeheartedly, while others grafted superficial elements onto conventional tactics without understanding the fundamental mindset shift required. They're missing the point, she told Torres, who sat across from her reviewing the same data. They're treating this like a set of techniques to be memorized rather than a completely different way of seeing. Torres nodded. We're victims of our own success. Everyone wants the results, but not everyone is willing to question their basic assumptions about what's possible. A knock at the door interrupted them. Yenzin entered, her expression serious. General Harris is here, says it's urgent. Maya exchanged a glance with Torres. Harris rarely made unscheduled visits. The general entered without ceremony, closing the door behind him. I need your team, immediately. He laid a file on Maya's desk bearing the highest classification level. Inside were satellite images of a remote mountain region, alongside intelligence reports marked critical priority. 3 days ago, a classified research transport went down in the Hindu Kush, Harris explained. On board were 4 scientists, working on next-generation defensive systems, along with complete prototype schematics. Maya studied the crash site imagery. The transport had gone down in one of the most inaccessible regions on Earth: jagged peaks, unstable weather patterns, and territory controlled by multiple hostile factions. Conventional recovery forces? She asked. Tried. Failed catastrophically. Harris's face was grim. 2 helicopters lost. 17 operators. No survivors. The weight of those losses settled heavily in the room. Maya continued examining. The intelligence, the scientists? At least 2 survived the crash, based on emergency beacon transmissions. But that was 48 hours ago. The beacons went silent yesterday. Torres leaned forward. And the technology? If it falls into the wrong hands, we're looking at a critical compromise of national security. Every major hostile power has operatives converging on the region. We need that technology secured and any survivors extracted. Maya analyzed the terrain maps. The crash site was in a narrow valley surrounded by peaks exceeding 20,000 feet. Atmospheric conditions created unpredictable weather patterns that could change from clear to lethal within minutes. The nearest friendly forces were hours away by air, if they could even reach the area at all. This is beyond challenging, she said finally. It's nearly impossible, Harris finished. That's precisely why I'm here. This is exactly the scenario your entire methodology was built for, the mission everyone else has already failed to complete. Maya felt the weight of the decision. This wasn't a training exercise or even a standard high-risk operation. This was the ultimate test of everything she had built in conditions that had already claimed 19 lives. I'll need my core team, she said. And complete operational autonomy. Harris nodded. You have it, whatever you need. But time is critical. Every intelligence service in the region is hunting for that crash site. After he departed, Maya gathered her senior instructors, Torres, Jensen, Reyes, and 2 others who had been with her from the beginning. This isn't just another mission, she told them, displaying the topographical data of the crash region. This is validation of everything we've built under the most extreme conditions possible. For the next 4 hours, they analyzed every aspect of the failed recovery attempts. The conventional approach had been predictable helicopter insertion to the nearest viable landing zone, followed by ground movement to the crash site. But the narrow valley created devastating wind shear conditions, and the surrounding ridges provided perfect positions for hostile forces to target approaching aircraft. They were thinking vertically, Maya observed, trying to overcome the terrain rather than working with it. Jensen studied the geological data. These mountains are primarily schist and quartzite highly metamorphic rock formations. Conventional wisdom says they're too unstable for ground navigation. Conventional wisdom is what got 17 operators killed, Torres said quietly. Maya zoomed in on a feature the satellite imagery had barely captured, a network of ancient shepherd paths cut into the mountainsides, abandoned decades ago when local populations were displaced by conflict. These weren't built for military use, she explained. They were created by people who understood the mountain's natural patterns, where snowmelt creates instability, where rock formations provide natural shelter, where wind patterns make travel possible or impossible. Reyes looked skeptical. Those paths are probably degraded beyond use after all these years. They won't appear on any tactical assessment, Maya countered, which means hostile forces won't be monitoring them. They'll be watching the obvious approaches, just like at the monastery. She began mapping a potential insertion route that would bring them to the crash site from the exact opposite direction that conventional forces would attempt. We insert here, 80 miles from the crash site, she said, marking a remote village on the border. No helicopters. No vehicles. We move on foot, using the shepherd network to navigate terrain that satellite imaging can't properly analyze. The team absorbed her proposal in silence. What she was suggesting would require them to traverse some of the most challenging mountain terrain on Earth, carrying full tactical gear with minimal support. 80 miles through those mountains, Torres began. Will take approximately 60 hours, Maya finished. Moving only during specific weather windows, navigating by environmental markers rather than GPS. She turned to face her team directly. I won't pretend this isn't beyond anything we've attempted before. The conditions are extreme, the intelligence limited, and the margin for error non-existent. If anyone wants to decline, now is the time. The room remained silent. These weren't just operators following orders, they were the pioneers of a methodology, built on seeing possibilities where others saw only obstacles. To refuse this mission would be to deny the very principles they had helped establish. When do we leave? Jensen asked simply. 12 hours, Maya replied. Prepare for extended alpine operations with minimal support. We'll stage through Bagram, then transition to indigenous transportation to reach the insertion point. As the team dispersed to prepare, Torres remained behind. You realize what happens if we fail, he said quietly. Maya nodded. The program gets scaled back. Maybe even shut down. They'll say the methodology works for standard operations, but falls apart under extreme conditions. And if we succeed? Then we've proven that the principles apply universally, that seeing beyond conventional limitations isn't just a tactical advantage but the future of special operations. Torres studied her expression. There's something else. Something you're not telling the others. Maya hesitated, then pulled up a classified intelligence report that hadn't been part of the main briefing. Based on the last transmission from the emergency beacon, at least one scientist is still alive. But he's injured, unable to move from the crash site. The temperature drops to -20 at night. He has minimal survival gear. How long can he last? The medical assessment gives him 3 days maximum. We'll be cutting it extremely close. Torres absorbed this silently. So it's not just about proving the methodology. It's about saving his life. It's about both, Maya replied. Because the methodology has always been about seeing the human. Factors that conventional tactics overlook. We're not just recovering technology, we're bringing someone home. 36 hours later, Maya led her team through a narrow mountain pass 10,000 feet above sea level. They had traveled the first 30 miles without incident, moving through terrain that most tactical assessments would have deemed impassable. The ancient shepherd paths were exactly as Maya had predicted, degraded, but navigable if you understood how to read the mountain's natural patterns. Where conventional forces would have relied on GPS coordinates and satellite imagery, Maya's team moved by interpreting geological features, weather indicators, and the subtle signs left by generations who had lived in harmony with the unforgiving landscape. They traveled light, but prepared specialized alpine gear designed for maximum mobility rather than conventional protection. Their communications were minimal, using burst transmission protocols only when absolutely necessary to avoid detection. As they crested a ridge overlooking a deep valley, Maya signaled the team to halt. Below them, through specialized optics, they could see movement, a small group of armed men, establishing monitoring positions along the most obvious approach routes to the crash site. Conventional recovery forces would hit those positions head-on, Torres observed quietly. Maya nodded. They're expecting a direct approach, probably another helicopter insertion followed by a frontal assault. Instead, she directed the team along a nearly invisible path that circumvented the valley entirely, a route that appeared on no military map but had been used by local shepherds for centuries during seasonal migrations. The path took them through a narrow fissure in the mountain face, barely wide enough for a single person to pass. Conventional tactical assessment would have rejected it immediately, too constrained, too vulnerable to ambush. But Maya had recognized what others missed. The fissure's geological composition created a natural, dampening effect for both thermal signatures and sound, making it nearly invisible to standard detection methods. By nightfall, they had bypassed 3 separate hostile observation posts without being detected, cutting their distance to the crash site to just 20 miles. As they established a minimal bivouac in a protected rock formation, Jensen approached Maya with updated weather data from their limited satellite connection. "Storm front moving in from the north," she reported. "Barometric pressure dropping rapidly. We've got maybe 8 hours before conditions deteriorate. In conventional operations, this would trigger an immediate abort decision. The approaching storm would make navigation nearly impossible and dramatically increase the risk of exposure casualties." But Maya saw beyond the obvious threat. "The storm is our window," she said, studying the weather pattern. "Every hostile force in the region will be seeking shelter, pulling back to defensive positions. Their observation effectiveness will drop to near zero." "We're going to move during the storm?" Rias asked incredulously. "Not during its peak," Maya clarified. "But in the transition phase when visibility is reduced but conditions are still navigable. If you know how to read the mountain signals." She gathered the team to explain her approach. "Where conventional forces would see only danger in the Fayu." Approaching weather, she recognized opportunity, a natural cover that would allow them to move when enemies would be blind. "The storm front will create predictable wind patterns through these valleys," she explained, sketching the terrain in the dirt. "Local shepherds call them ghost fingers, currents of relatively calm air that flow between the violent gusts. If we time our movement with these patterns, we can cover significant distance while remaining virtually invisible." Torres looked skeptical. "That's assuming the patterns are predictable. At these altitudes, weather is chaotic." "To instruments and algorithms, yes," Maya agreed. "But not to those who've learned to read the natural indicators." She pointed to subtle features in the surrounding landscape, how certain rock formations channeled wind, how snow accumulated on specific faces, how local vegetation bent in established patterns. "These mountains speak their own language," she said. "Most people never learn to listen. But that's exactly what we've trained to do here, what others miss, see what others overlook." 6 hours later, as the storm's advance guard began to sweep across the mountains, Maya led the team through exactly the pattern she had predicted. They moved in short, controlled bursts, using the mountain's natural features for both navigation and protection. Where conventional operators would have been paralyzed by the deteriorating conditions, Maya's team flowed with them, reading the environment in real time and adapting accordingly. By dawn, they had covered 16 miles through terrain that conventional tactical assessment would have deemed impossible to traverse in ideal conditions, let alone during a developing storm. They were now just 4 miles from the crash site, approaching from a direction no hostile force had considered worth monitoring. As they prepared for the final approach, Maya gathered the team in a sheltered outcropping. "Intelligence indicates at least 3 separate hostile groups converging on the crash site," she said, reviewing the limited data from their last transmission. "They'll be expecting a conventional recovery attempt, heavily armed, technology-dependent, following established tactical doctrine." She outlined their approach, not a frontal assault or even a standard infiltration, but something far more radical. "We'll enter the crash site perimeter by moving through what satellite imaging shows as an unstable rock field. Conventional assessment marks it as a no-go zone, too unstable for tactical movement." Jensen studied the imagery. "That's because it is unstable from a conventional perspective. Those rocks will shift under any standard movement pattern." Maya nodded. "Exactly. But local goat herders move through similar formations every season. The key isn't avoiding the instability, it's becoming part of it." She demonstrated the Technique: a fluid, almost dance-like movement pattern that distributed weight in counterintuitive ways, allowing navigation through seemingly impassable terrain. The hostiles have established their security perimeter based on what they believe is possible, she explained. Our advantage is that we're not limited by those same beliefs. The final approach began at dusk as the storm temporarily abated, creating a false sense of security among the hostile forces surrounding the crash site. Maya led the team through the rock field using the techniques she had demonstrated, moving not against the natural instability but with it, turning what conventional tactics would consider a liability into an asset. They reached the outer perimeter, undetected, slipping through gaps in the security coverage that existed not because of enemy negligence, but because no conventional tactical assessment would consider those approaches viable. The crash site itself was nestled in a narrow ravine, the transport broken into 3 main sections. Maya could see movement around the central fuselage, armed men, attempting to breach the reinforced crew compartment where, presumably, the surviving scientist had taken refuge. Torres surveyed the situation through specialized optics. I count 16 hostiles. Mixed armament, no standardized tactical formation. Probably competing groups with the same objective. Maya analyzed their positioning, seeing not just their physical arrangement, but the psychological patterns underlying their operations. These weren't disciplined military units, but opportunistic forces driven by competing incentives, which created exploitable gaps in their security consciousness. They're focused entirely on the fuselage, she observed. No one's monitoring the peripheral sections where the technology storage would logically be located. She divided the team into 3 elements, 1 to recover the critical technology, 1 to extract the survivor, and 1 to establish a security perimeter using the natural terrain features that the hostile forces had ignored. What followed wasn't a conventional assault, but a precisely choreographed sequence of movements that exploited the psychological and tactical blind spots of their adversaries. Each team moved through gaps in perception rather than gaps in physical coverage, approaching from angles that registered as impossible in conventional tactical thinking. The technology recovery team reached the storage compartment undetected, securing the prototype and schematics within 7 minutes of infiltration. The extraction team created a diversion by triggering a controlled rock slide on the opposite side of the ravine, not through explosives, which would draw immediate attention, but by exploiting the natural instability of the terrain in a way that appeared completely natural. As the hostile forces diverted their attention to the unexpected disturbance, Maya led the direct action element to the fuselage, neutralizing the immediate threats with surgical precision. Inside the damaged crew compartment, they found Dr. Elijah Chen hypothermic, dehydrated, but alive. He had survived by applying scientific principles to wilderness survival, creating a microclimate within the damaged fuselage that conventional survival training would never have conceived. "You're not the standard recovery team," he observed weakly as they prepared him for transport. "No," Maya agreed. "We're what comes after the standard teams fail." The extraction itself was equally unconventional. Rather than attempting to fight their way out through increasingly alert hostile forces, Maya led the team through a drainage system beneath the ravina, natural feature formed by seasonal meltwater that appeared on no tactical map but was clearly visible to anyone who understood how mountain hydrology functioned. They emerged 3 miles from the crash site, having bypassed the entire hostile security perimeter by moving through terrain that conventional assessment would have marked as impassable. By the time the hostile forces realized the scientist and technology were gone, Maya's team was already navigating back through the mountain passages, using the returning storm front as both cover and transportation, riding the natural air currents to increase their movement speed while minimizing exposure. 72 hours later, they reached the extraction point, a small village, where local allies had arranged ground transportation to the nearest secure facility, Dr. Chun had stabilized under their care. The prototype technology was intact. The mission that had claimed 17 lives when approached conventionally had been completed without a single casualty when viewed through Maya's methodology. As the extraction vehicle departed the village, Torres sat beside Maya in the rear compartment. "You know what this means," he said quietly. Maya nodded. "It means the methodology works under any conditions, from standard operations to the most extreme scenarios imaginable." "It's more than that," Torres replied. "It means you've fundamentally changed how special operations will function from this point forward. Not just for us, but globally." 1 month later, Maya stood before the Joint Special Operations Command, presenting the results of what was now being called Operation Impossible Summit. The room contained not just American military leadership, but representatives from allied special forces communities worldwide. The success of this operation wasn't about superior technology or even exceptional operators, she explained. It was about a fundamental shift in perception, seeing beyond what conventional wisdom says is possible to what actually is possible when you read the environment correctly. She displayed the movement map from their operation, the unconventional routes, the counterintuitive tactical decisions, the complete rejection of established doctrine in favor of adaptive response to environmental realities. The 17 operators who died in the initial recovery attempts weren't lacking in courage, skill, or dedication, she continued. They were limited only by a framework that defined certain approaches as impossible before they were ever attempted. A veteran commander raised his hand. "What you're describing requires exceptional people operators who can think beyond established parameters. How do we scale this across conventional forces?" Maya had been expecting this question. It was the same objection she had faced from the beginning, the belief that what she had accomplished was exceptional rather than repeatable. "The methodology isn't about exceptional individuals," she replied. "It's about creating a framework that allows ordinary operators to achieve exceptional results by seeing what others miss. It's not about being special, it's about being properly prepared to recognize opportunities that conventional training overlooks." As the briefing concluded, General Harris approached with a document bearing the presidential seal. "The Joint Chiefs have unanimously approved the global implementation of your methodology," he said. "From this point forward, the Intuitive Operations Protocol will be standard doctrine for all special operations planning." He handed her the document. "But there's something else. The President has authorized the creation of a new multinational Special Operations Division 1 dedicated exclusively to missions that conventional assessment deems impossible. He wants you to lead it." Maya accepted the document, recognizing the significance of what she was being offered. Not just validation of her methods, but the opportunity to institutionalize them at the highest possible level. "This goes beyond anything I imagined when I was sitting on that bench as an observer," she said quietly. Harris smiled. "That's precisely why you're the right person to lead it. You understand what it means to transform from overlooked to essential. Now you can create that pathway for others." 3 months later, Maya stood on the observation platform overlooking the newly established International Intuitive Operations Center. Below her, operators from 12 nations trained together, learning not just tactical techniques, but an entirely new way of seeing the world. Jensen, now a senior instructor, was leading a group through an environmental reading exercise, teaching them to identify opportunities that existed in plain sight but remained invisible to conventional tactical thinking. Torres supervised an infiltration simulation where operators navigated terrain features that standard assessment protocols classified as impassable, proving that with proper perception, such barriers became pathways. Reyes had developed an entirely new communications methodology based on environmental adaptation rather than technological superiority, enabling teams to maintain operational cohesion even in complete electronic blackout conditions. As Maya Watched them, she felt the completion of a circle that had begun years earlier when she sat silently at the edge of a briefing room. Her insights ignored, her potential overlooked. Captain Mercer joined her on the platform. "Quite a change from your days as an observer," he remarked. Maya nodded. "The most important change isn't what's happening down there," she said, gesturing toward the training grounds. "It's what's happening in here." She tapped her temple. "Helping people see beyond what they've been told is possible." Mercer studied her profile. "You know, when you first volunteered for that extraction mission, I thought you were either desperate or delusional. Now entire special operations doctrines are being rewritten based on your methodologies." "It was never about me," Maya replied. "It was about recognizing that our limitations are primarily perceptual rather than physical. We don't fail because we lack ability, we fail because we accept boundaries that exist only in our minds." As they spoke, a new group of candidates arrived at the center's main gate, men and women selected not for their physical prowess or combat experience, but for their demonstrated ability to question conventional wisdom and see beyond established parameters. Among them, Maya noticed a slight figure hanging back from the others, a woman whose body language showed the familiar tension of someone who had been told repeatedly that she didn't belong, that her vision didn't matter, that her insights were irrelevant. "Excuse me," Maya said to Mercer, making her way down from the platform. She approached the new arrival, recognizing in her the same quiet determination, the same patient preparation, the same readiness for a moment that might seem slow in coming, but would inevitably arrive. "Welcome to the program," Maya said simply. The woman looked surprised to be addressed directly by the program's legendary founder. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm not sure I belong here, but you've been preparing anyway," Maya finished for her. "Building skills that no one asked you to develop, seeing things that others overlook, getting ready for an opportunity you weren't sure would ever come." The woman's expression shifted from surprise to recognition, the powerful realization of being truly seen, perhaps for the first time. "Yes," she said quietly, "exactly that." Maya gestured toward the training center beyond them. "That's precisely why you belong here, because readiness finds its moment, because preparation beats permission, because the observer today becomes the leader tomorrow." As the new candidate joined her group, Maya felt the profound satisfaction of witnessing the continuation of what she had started, not just a training methodology or a tactical doctrine, but a fundamental reimagining of what was possible when you refused to accept that some paths were closed to you. The desert wind picked up, sending dust swirling across the training grounds, in patterns that most would see as random, but that Maya could read as clearly as words on a page. This was her legacy, teaching others to see the messages written in the world around them, the opportunities hidden in plain sight, the pathways that existed where conventional wisdom saw only barriers. From observer to pioneer, from overlooked to indispensable, from denied to defining. This was the power of being ready when others weren't, of preparing when no one was watching, of seeing what others missed. And it all began with 4 simple words that changed everything. "I can take it." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.